Welcome back to the Adventures of the Monad, which will look at life, the universe, and everything. My name is Kazim Kamal-ur-Rahim. In this series, I ask the question, where do we come from? Who are we? And where are we going? I post one presentation a week. Please subscribe to my website and hit the bell icon for notifications of future videos. You can also leave comments and join in forum discussions on my website. Just before we dive into another major topic, as promised, I wish to look at symbolism behind the Jesus story. During the course of this presentation, it has been apparent that a lot of the terminology used in esoterics comes from the lexicon of the Gnostics. The relationship between energy motion, consciousness, and matter is mirrored in their imagery of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the case of the Holy Spirit, this refers to our guardian angel. What should really be there is the term mother, but we all know the Church has an issue with women. So, let's look at the symbolism behind the Jesus story. Lawrence points out in his books that the life of Jesus, as portrayed in the New Testament, is largely fictitious. This is primarily based on the wisdom teachings of the Gnostics, and therefore uses their symbolism. Esoterics is famous for taking a simple point and complicating it to a point where you even forget what the question was. The excuse that the mystics use is that they are wrapping a mystery within an enigma. I just think they're being deliberately difficult. To cut a long story short, Lawrence states that the character of Jesus was created by the Gnostic fraternity as a mechanism to propagate their views of the cosmos to the masses. They did it through a series of stories that people could relate to. They set it in the Jewish community because the first of the Gnostic authors, Mark, happened to be Jewish. When he first went to press with his work, the Gnostics found that there was such interest in the stories that about 50 other scribes got into the act and started to pen their own accounts of their mystic teachings through the narrative of the Jesus story. What triggered the writing in the first place, you may be thinking? According to Lawrence, approximately 150 years before the fictional birth of the baby Jesus, the Bodhisattva did take incarnation, preaching to a band of close followers, and was stoned to death by a Jewish sect called the Essenes. The world teacher went by the name of Jeshu, was born to a high-ranking Jewish family, and did something unusual in that he enrolled in two mystery schools, firstly with the Essenes and then with the Gnostics. Where he enrolls is fairly irrelevant. After all, he is the world teacher. So all esoteric knowledge stems from him anyway. Although it should be said that the persona known as Jeshu was not the Christ, who descended later into the body of Jeshu for a short period of time. So it could be argued that Jeshu was indeed gaining knowledge in both mystery schools. So then, what is it with the Jesus story? Well, the major events portrayed in the Gospel describe the key stages along the path to enlightenment. It also goes on to the fourth initiation, I-4, an entry into the kingdom of heaven. Let's take a closer look at the major events in Jesus' life and see what they are really referring to. The birth of Jesus is an allegory as the monad enters the path I-1. It has just overcome base desires, moving its focus from the lower half of its emotional envelope to the middle of it. The symbology of where Jesus was born, in a stable, represents our birth into the body that has the same functionality as it did when we were in the third, the animal kingdom. Linked to this birth were shepherds. These represent guardian angels. They are the devas that look after their flock. The three kings who pitched up over the horizon are allegories of the Deva Rajas. These are the angel kings of the mental, the emotional, and the physical worlds. They, along with their minions, oversee the construction of our subtle bodies. Hence, they arrived bearing gifts. The next station along the path in the story of Jesus is the baptism. This is the purification of the ego as it overcomes its emotionality and moves its residence to the permanent mental molecule 47-4. The monad has now taken the second initiation, I2. A noteworthy event in the life of the character of Jesus is his temptation. This is the final test the monad undergoes before enlightenment. It has to overcome spiritual pride and conceit. These two conditions often increase with the acquisition of esoteric knowledge. Another term that figures prominently in events surrounding Jesus' life is that of Transfiguration. This refers to the subjugation of the ego by the soul and the acquisition of causal consciousness at the third initiation, I3. The main theme of the Jesus story is his eventual crucifixion. Considering this event never happened, even to the world teacher over 100 years earlier, what is the significance of this imagery? The Gnostics used the crucifixion to represent the dissolution of the causal body. This occurs at the start of the fourth initiation, I4. At this time, the monad momentarily feels lost and forsaken between two kingdoms, the fourth, the human kingdom, and the fifth, the unity kingdom. This is portrayed in the Gospels when Jesus cries out, my God, why hath thou forsaken me?" This is from Matthew chapter 7, verses 45 to 50. The dissolution of the causal body is called the second death. The resurrection is a fairly easy term to understand now, as this is when the monad enters the fifth, the unity kingdom. This occurs at the end of I4. It has now achieved victory over death, which is a colorful way of saying that the monad no longer has to incarnate as it has no more karma. Finally, we come to Ascension. The monad moves from the fifth to the sixth kingdom. This is the natural home of the Christ. The Christ, the world teacher, did not ascend to it. It already reached that exalted plane of existence a long time ago. Here endeth my recounting of the fourth stage of enlightenment, as serialized in the good book. Now, on to another interesting topic, and one that often gives me palpitations when I have discussions with students of esoterics. This happens because they often tell me that space and time do not exist in the spiritual realms. After you have listened to me banging on about the 49 planes of matter over the course of 25 presentations, you can imagine my reaction when I hear such heresies. Let's start off with deep space. This is not any empty, lifeless void as scientists currently believe. Just because the physical plane is empty does not mean that the other 48 planes are. A physicist may say, but there is dark matter and there is dark energy. And I would reply, there is also Santa Claus and there is the Tooth Fairy. So-called empty space is filled with various grades of subtle matter, thought forms, non-physical beings, and energetic blueprints of everything that has ever existed. That is enough to be getting along with. Looking out into the night sky, you see stars. And if you look past these stars, you see galaxies. Intergalactic space is not empty, and it is not full of 49 planes of matter. It is in fact just full of one atoms. The primary atoms that first come into the universe from the antiverse. These atoms are potentially conscious, but no more than that. They are the smallest units of matter found in the universe, and they are also the monad in its pristine form, because it has not joined with 48 other monads to form the next plane of matter, plane 2. I have alluded to the fact that the primary function of these one atoms may be to transfer energy within the universe. They also make up the stuffing of the universe. Remove just one of these primary atoms and the whole universe will collapse. That is a scary thought, but remember, the universe is within the metaverse. That structure comprises all the trillions of universes and the antiverse which surrounds them. For the universe to maintain its form, it has to match the pressure of the antiverse around it. In fact, the universe expands as it takes in more primary atoms to feed energy, fohat, into the universe. This process does not continue forever, and that is why time exists. But I will get into that in due course. Interstellar space is the space between stars within a galaxy. It is composed of the full gamut of atoms from 1 to 49. Our solar system is composed of just 7 types of atoms and 42 types of molecules. Of interest here is that these 49 types of matter represent in our solar system echoes of the 49 atomic types which make up the universe. Vibrations of subtle matter on the 48 planes above the 49th allows light and other forms of radiation to travel through empty space. Vibrations in these subtle matters also cause light, electricity, and heat to manifest on the physical plane. Is the universe infinite or finite? As you can imagine, there are many theories about the nature of the universe that circulate in the realms of astrophysics. Some astronomers assume that the universe is infinite and that space is flat. If that were the case, cosmic radiation of every wavelength would be detectable, but no large waves are detected in the background radiation measured by astronomers' instruments. The implication of this is that the universe must therefore be finite. A small universe can only accommodate small waves, just as a small pond has small ripples. Some astronomers postulate that the universe is a dodecahedron, approximately 60 billion light years in diameter. This shape of universe gives the impression that it is 120 times bigger than it really is. It is almost like a cosmic hall of mirrors. Inside a universe, there are no boundaries. As you leave it, you re-enter it immediately. As an analogy, imagine the Earth and its surface being endless, as it has no boundaries. Yet, it has a finite surface. The universe is a closed system that has no boundaries, and space is curved like the surface of the Earth. Plato and Aristotle claimed the universe as finite. Plato saying that it was a 12-sided dodecahedron. This is rather like a ball made from 12 pieces of leather. Pythagoras claimed the dodecahedron formed the timber on which the spherical framework of the heavens were built. Now, you can imagine that if this is how Pythagoras viewed the form of the universe, I am going to be very partial to that idea. Why? Because all these presentations are based on the theories of Pythagoras in the first place. Let's get down and start to look at the basics of what it takes to make a dimension in space. An object in the physical universe can have a maximum of 3 spatial dimensions. A dot has 0 dimensions. A line has 1 dimension, length. A square has 2 dimensions, length and width. A cube has 3 dimensions, length, width, and height. This is where people's perception of space usually ends. However, you often hear of the 4th dimension, whatever that is meant to be. It is often equated to time. I wish now to outline the Hylozoic view of how our universe is constructed in terms of spatial dimensions. Each plane of the universe, according to Hylozoics, has one more spatial dimension than the preceding one. It can be seen from the table that starting off with 3 dimensions on the 49th plane of matter, by the time you get to the first, you have 51 dimensions. This is a far cry from the usual mantra pronounced by so many that we live in 3 dimensions and time is the 4th. Another thing worth noting is that someone who dwells on the solar systemic monadic plane experiences their environment in 9 dimensions. You are aware of your environment in 3 dimensions, they are aware of it in 9. I have often pondered what that might be like. Obviously I cannot. But I do talk about objective consciousness and how this can be achieved in the 3 lowest planes of matter when we gain enlightenment. In the same way, someone functioning on the 43rd plane of matter, someone like the Christ, can be simultaneously conscious on its plane and all the planes below it. This may give us a glimpse of what is achievable with this number of dimensions at our disposal. Now to complete the set. We can say the universe has 51 spatial dimensions, but it also has one more dimension. This dimension is temporal. In other words, it is linked to time. This gives a grand total of 52 dimensions. This brings me neatly back to the assertion that some people make that we live in 3 dimensions and the 4th is time. They are correct, because that temporal dimension is present on all planes of matter. However, it is present in different ways. It is still temporal, but how that time is experienced differs. Just in the same way a child and an adult experience time differently, so do our guardian angels operating on the 4th plane of matter, 46, where there are 6 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal one. It must be remembered that all 52 dimensions exist everywhere in the universe, but planets have higher proportions of denser, subtle planes surrounding them. Deep space has a greater proportion of the more subtle planes. The one atom, the primary atom, the one that comes into the universe from the antiverse, vibrates in 51 spatial dimensions. It then combines with 48 other one atoms and forms the next lower plane, plane 2. It now vibrates on 1 lower dimension. This repeats itself until you get to plane 49, where there are only 3 dimensions left. As has already been discussed, we cannot go below 49 planes of matter. It is a mistake to call the emotional plane the 4th dimension. The reason for this is that each higher plane contains all the planes below it. In the same vein, the monadic plane contains planes 43 to 49. The important thing to grasp is that all dimensions interpenetrate one another. It is our level of consciousness that determines what we perceive. This is why evolution is often spoken of as the expansion of consciousness, As the monad expands this consciousness field, its focus changes through the planes of matter. Those planes do not disappear. In fact, the monad can focus down into the lower planes at will. It is just that it has access to the higher planes as well. In this way, it is fair to say that we do not move through the universe. We just expand our awareness of the universe around us. The concept of getting into a spaceship and dashing off to explore the galaxy is faintly ludicrous when you can just sit in the comfort of your living room and instantly find yourself anywhere your consciousness can expand to. Remember, when you do this, you do not just arrive at another planet or star system and see material envelopes. You see all the envelopes your level of consciousness allows you to experience. I suspect the material globes are the least interesting of all the envelopes of any particular body to study. Before you get too enthusiastic and decide to expand your consciousness to visit Sirius, remember, matter and consciousness cannot exist separately. So work out first what matter you intend to project to Sirius before your consciousness follows. The etheric, emotional, and mental consciousness of the average human is subjective, sensing only internal happenings. Most humans are only able to objectively perceive the lower half of the 49th plane. This means solids, liquids, and gases. Clairvoyance can see into the emotional plane, but the presence of the extra dimension makes psychic readings imprecise. What is perceived on the emotional plane in 4 dimensions has to then be translated by the 3-dimensional brain. This goes a long way to explain why our dreams appear so disjointed and fluidic. The concept of multiple dimensions have been explained metaphorically in our literature. A good example can be found in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 2. In my Father's house there are many mansions. This sentence, understood correctly, means that not only are there more planes than just the physical, but each higher plane is more expansive, hence the use of the metaphor a mansion. The Lord Buddha uses another metaphor, that of direction. The 10 directions referred to by the Buddha refers us up to the causal plane, which has 5 dimensions and 10 directions. This is the entire sphere of human endeavor. So just to clarify, there are 48 levels of hyperspace. These are the planes 48 to plane 1. They can also be referred to as having from 4 dimensions to 51 dimensions. As already discussed, the magnitude of space increases as one ascends to the higher planes. However, this increase in spatial dimension is compensated for by an increase in consciousness. As such, each higher plane appears to shrink until the vastness of plane 1, the entire galaxy, can be comprehended as a point. It is easy to write the last sentence. It is much more difficult to perceive what exactly it may be like. Now back to one of my bugbears. This is when people state that time only exists in physical reality. Somehow, when you move to the spirit world, however, you find that time vanishes. This temporal element exists on all planes of matter. What changes is that the perception of time and space differ on each successive plane of matter. What is more, on each successive plane, they matter less and less. That is not to say they are not there. The concept of time slowly disappears, and the perception of the eternal now, a phrase often used by esotericists to sound mystical, does increase. Talking of time, that will be the topic of my next presentation. If you wish to read a transcript of the presentation or leave comments, links to my website are in the description box below. Thank you.